Now that we've given you the broad strokes of what Empower is about, I'm going to invite our data governance policy panel to discuss the role of policy and strategies in shaping data ecosystems and how this builds into the vision of making Empower a hub for data governance. This panel brings together key expertise and knowledge in national and European data strategies, e-government, and data protection. Here to join me is Government CIO Barry Lowry, who has spent more than 35 years working in ICT and in his government role has been involved with the implementation of Ireland's Data Sharing and Governance Bill. Declan Deasy, a former Director for Information Systems and Interoperability Solutions at the European Commission's Directorate General for Informatics, who currently works as a Senior Digital Strategy Advisor. Derek Mitchell, CEO of IPOSI, the Irish platform for patient organisations, science and industry, who will offer his perspective on patient involvement with health data strategies. Geraldine Larkin, CEO of the National Standards Authority of Ireland, the state agency responsible for standardisation, conformity, assessment and measurement. And Ultan O'Carroll, Deputy Commissioner for Technology and Operational Performance in the Office of the Data Protection Commission. So to start with you, Barry, how do you see Empower feeding into a national data strategy and governance going forward?
Thanks, Elaine. And can I just add my congratulations to everyone involved in getting Empower up and running and involved in the launch today. I think actually this is a perfect storm to be having this discussion today and formally launching Empower. I first met Bran and Ray representing all the people behind Empower, Bran Donnellan, who was mentioned earlier, and Ray Walsh, probably about 18 months ago. And at the time, we had passed the Data Sharing and Governance Act. And we also had the Public Service Data Strategy approved by government. Now, what were they about? They were really trying to help Ireland be an exemplar in the achievement of the EU once only principle, and to provide a legal basis for public service bodies sharing data, to improve data quality. But the very important one was to increase trust of all partners and the public through greater accuracy of data management and data holdings, and in transparency in how we use data. And the Data Governance Board has since been set up. And one of the themes that always emerges as we talk about committees and future data sharing is the term ethics, because really good data sharing should almost hit the sweet spot between ethical data sharing and valuable data sharing. And valuable plays very much into GDPR, where you start to really think about purpose and specificity and so on. So that was one side of it. But obviously then the EU started talking about passing the EU Data Governance Act. And that created a completely different agenda, because our act was very much about public service bodies. And the EU Data Governance Act is about using data and creating a mechanism to enable the safe reuse of certain categories of data by various bodies, including academia and including the industry itself. And the Data Governance Act is full of terms like intermediaries and user-driven data sharing and user-donated data and data altruism and so on. And of course, how do we make sense of that? How do we make it work in Ireland? And that was a dilemma for us all involved. And I guess the final piece in this are two national strategies which have just come along. The National Digital Strategy, which will be launched before Christmas, and the National AI Strategy, which was launched a couple of months ago. But they are very much focused on the use of data as a valuable asset to grow the economy and so on. But that requires getting this balance that I talked about, building trust of the public. And the AI strategy talks about leveraging AI for economic and social benefits and creating innovation opportunities through that. And when you're starting to talk about that, what you really do need is to have a national conversation about data and about the value of data, but the need to protect data. And I think Brian Fitzgerald's quote's absolutely right. When he quoted Clive Humby, data is the new oil. I'm not sure when Humby said that, he probably realized that oil has always polarized society, because for those people who think it's a good thing, a lot of people recognize the bad elements of it as a fuel type and everything else. And data is a bit like that as well. We know that for things like health research, data is of immeasurable value, but we also know of the abuses of data. And so the opportunity to have a national discussion about how we use data responsibly in Ireland, how we use it to grow our society, but at the same time be an exemplar and privacy orientation, privacy driven, that's really important. And so when I heard about the Empower vision to actually be the format for doing that, I could only encourage it because it was exactly what we needed.
Thanks. And Geraldine, there's no doubt that the NSAI will be a huge part of this national conversation, especially in terms of interoperability and standardization. So what is the NSAI's view of the Empower Standards programme?
So Elaine, thank you very much. And firstly, to echo Barry's previous congratulations to Empower. This is a wonderful initiative, and it's terrific from my perspective to see what is happening and the potential that exists. And I suppose just to kind of, even though before we embark on this new journey, to call out the Empower investigators who are already doing such a wonderful job in collaboration with the NSAI. So Ray Walsh and Dave Lewis and Marcus, Pamela Hussey, Suashit Das, who are all involved in NSAI committees and all have leadership positions around a huge variety of topics that we've touched upon: AI, data, IoT, health informatics, and the list goes on, and it's really terrific. And for those of you who don't know us, the NSAI work on a global as well as a European scale in setting out standards. And to do this, and to do this successfully, we require domain experts, such as those in Empower, to represent Ireland and Europe in setting the standards agenda. And this is really, really essential in the case of the digital single market and the challenges that we face in managing and manipulating data as the new oil. And I see two key roles for the Empower programme as we go forward in supporting standards as a part of data governance. Now, the first of those revolves around when a standard is needed. NSAI works typically with relevant parties at national or international level to create and develop the appropriate standard. And for this to be successful, we rely on our national experts making leading edge contributions. Now, Barry has already mentioned the National AI Strategy, the National Digital Strategy. And here's where the story is all interconnected, because again, standards are woven into all of these areas. So the NSAI, through collaboration with research and academia, really needs to be able to interface with the Empower programme to influence on that national stage. But equally, Empower experts are really well positioned to make the contributions on an international basis and to create these next generation international standards for interoperability and governance in emerging technology. And Mark posed the question, why Ireland? Well, Mark, I'd say back to you, why not Ireland, particularly from a standards perspective? And let me share with you some of the progress that we are making on an international stage in the world of standardization. So already I've mentioned through you our collaboration in the work we're doing in playing a leading role in the development of first generation standards. Now that extends to first generation work in the area of artificial intelligence, international standards. And these are standards that will be fundamental to what we've spoken about already, to the application of the future European AI regulation, where, as we've already recognized, trustworthiness of AI has a major focus. Indeed, an Irish expert has also recently led the development of a technical specification on the governance of data. So part 3 of that technical specification talks about guidelines for data classification, and that's international work that we've already placed internationally. So when I look to the Empower programme, what I see is that it allows us build on this success and continue this work with, and this is the crucial, critical part of it, with research, with academia, with industry, such that we can bring everybody together collectively in continuing this leadership that we have already achieved and had success with. So that's the first key role that I see in terms of the relationship between Empower and standards in fast tracking the data governance. The second role for the programme is then in the application of those standards. And again, it empowers leadership in standards development in partnership with the NSAI. I see huge opportunities for that partnership to help increase the adoption of standards and systems interoperability in industry. Because adoption of standards is critical. Adoption facilitates the application of standards. And this in turn facilitates the sharing and the reuse of data. And this is really, really important because interoperability matters. It matters to industry in the first instance, but as we've alluded to, it also matters in terms of trustworthiness to society. So standards in collaboration with the Empower programme really offer the solution to both of those worlds. So that's where I see the critical role for the Empower programme. And in that regard, I'd like to wish everybody the very best of success because we have a huge body of work to do.
Certainly a lot to do. And following on from the standards perspective, part of the data governance challenge is providing trust and transparency, as you alluded to there, when dealing with personal information, and particularly when it comes to patient data. So Derek, I'd like to know how you think Empower can address some of those challenges.
Thanks, Elaine, and thanks for the invitation to join the policy panel. And for anybody who's unfamiliar with our work in this area, IPOSI was set up 15 years ago by Irish patient groups and patient advocates to act as a platform for patients and their representatives at the national and indeed the European level. And even this morning, we had a digital discussion with at the European level, talking about the European health data space. And this is certainly of interest to patients in Ireland, but also on the European level. And what we find is that, and certainly in IPOSI, we have the expertise and the reach to bring patient perspectives. We're the largest patient network in the country with over 105 patient groups. But we also have individual members as well. And we're able to channel their voices at the policy level, and we've been doing it for many years. And what I see the benefit for our involvement and also patient groups' involvement in Empower is bringing that trustworthiness question right to the fore. And it's great to see the likes of Geraldine and NSAI here as well, because certainly we would believe that standards-based approaches are patient-based approaches. And it's great to see our colleagues in Future Neuro playing a key role here to really look at new ways and new mechanisms, new consent models, new ways in which health data can really be maximized in this country. So, and I would also welcome Barry's points about really the connections that we need to be making. Barry spoke about the dilemma that existed at the government level when the EU Data Protection Act really was going maybe one step further than our own work here. And from our perspective, it would be really important, if there is a dilemma at that policy level, to include stakeholder perspectives, and if particularly in health, that patient and public perspectives are brought in to maybe assuage some of the fears that are there around sensitive personal data, because this is something that we've been looking at for the last number of years in IPOSI. Earlier this year, we launched the verdict of a citizen's jury, and that was 25 members of the public who got the opportunity to hear more about how health data is collected in this country, how it's potentially not in a position to be shared, and what they want to see in terms of future actions in this area. So it's really interesting to see that there's moves afoot to put public service information on a more shareable level. But our understanding of it is that in its current guise, it doesn't actually go that level further, whereby you're talking about the sensitive data that's around personal health data. So it would be really interesting to see if Empower can play a role in looking at where we are currently at and influencing policy towards where we should be at in terms of encouraging innovation within the system. and data is that oil of the system, and no better place than in the health sector. Certainly over the last 18 months, we've begun to appreciate the value of having health data being able to be shared effectively, securely, and for public health benefit. And certainly we would see Empower as being really, really well placed to form what we would call deliberative dialogues with the public and with patients, particularly for health data. And this is something that we've seen across society in terms of the need for policy to be developed with citizens' perspectives incorporated into it. We've seen it in the Citizens' Assembly, we've seen it at our political level. And it's this transition from a research program to become more socially relevant and more policy oriented is where I think the involvement of ourselves and other groups in this area will make the Empower consortium just far more impactful. So again, really welcome today's launch and really look forward to being involved with all of the different research centers. So thanks again.
It's great. And I think that's a great point to bring in Olsen as well, who I'd like to ask about the key points on data privacy and the rights of data ownership, which are obviously key concerns of consumers in respect of what kind of work Empower will be doing.
Hi, thanks, Elaine. Yeah, it's great to be here to talk about this. It's very important work. Just from the outset, I want to clarify that the Data Protection Commission, independent regulator, we're not part of the Empower project, but we have been consulted by the Empower team already on this. It's great to see that there's a clear work stream within the project to look at data protection and privacy matters. That said, and listening to the previous speakers as well about data being the new oil, I'd like to propose a different a different way of talking about it. Is data is the new sand. Sand comes in very small pieces. It can be agglomerated into very large pieces. It can turn into bricks, can be washed away in water, it can be blown around in the air. And that kind of analogy really underpins the complexity of some of the regulatory aspects that are involved in data governance, in risk management, and in compliance. Now, we've talked about already the Data Governance Act here in Ireland and the proposals from Europe on data governance services and markets. We've also got AI regulation being proposed in Europe, which looks at some of these things. We have the medical research regulation, which applies to medical data, where the data governance bill here doesn't. So there's a lot of things to do, a lot of things to think about when you're taking and embarking on a data sharing project such as this, and many things to think about, not least the data subject rights, whether they're patients or otherwise, and how any controller, as we call them in the data protection world, involved in this, and there's probably going to be many, how they share that data and what their obligations are to support data subject rights. It's important that they're accountable, and this really is about how they demonstrate to people that they can be trusted, how they're clear and plain in the language they use to describe what they're doing, how long they're going to keep the data, what purpose it's for, what legal basis they're using to actually do that research and the data sharing processing that goes on. For instance, I went to the doctor recently. I was asked to sign a consent form on one page. I turned it over. On the back, there was probably about 1,000 words on the back of it that I was supposed to understand in the blink of an eye and sign away. It's totally impossible to do that kind of thing. So in the future, when we are doing collection, sharing and research around these kinds of areas with large amounts of data in very expensive projects, it's very important that transparency is key to that, and that it gives people that trust in what they're doing and in handing over their data, because it is their data, and it are their rights that we're looking at here. So data protection by design is one aspect of the GDPR that is built into the Empower plan. We know that from talking with them before. That's very important. And that means that when it does come to the technological aspects, which I'm very interested in, around data sharing, that security is a key aspect of that, isolation of data or data sharing agreement, pools of data, so that we don't end up with some terrible nightmare scenario where malware attacks gets into one data controller or data sharing pod, for instance, and gets spread rampant across others without any control. Those kinds of things are the nightmare scenarios we don't want to get into. And there's lots of research, I think, that Empower can do to look at those things. One other aspect that's very important at the moment is, of course, the question of data transfers, which can occur when you use international partners. And if Empower is to be a global project, then it's got to be very careful about these kinds of things. We've already seen issues arise in Europe, particularly in France, with the Health Data Hub, where the Supreme Court there, the Conseil d'Etat, asked them to change their direction completely. And for projects such as Empower, which might do that kind of thing, and which are going to cost a lot of money to do, I think it's very important, and I think it's understood, it's very important that these kinds of things are done correctly from the start, from the get-go, because a sanction later on of some kind, and it probably won't be all that much money in terms of a public organization, because there's a limit to what can be charged or sanctioned in terms of a fine under the Irish Data Protection Act. But if there was a situation where we had to come back in the future and ask things to be redesigned, then that wouldn't be good for anyone. So it's very important to get these things done from the right. So finally, I'm very glad that we're involved, that we're talking with Empower, and that we can do more together. I think there's a lot of things to be done, a lot of things to think about, a lot of ways to look at governance, risk, and compliance. And I look forward to doing that in the future. Thank you.
Thanks. And it's evident why an organization like DPC needs to be involved here. But just to wrap up, we'll give you the closing point, Declan. Why would you say now is the time for a European data charter, and how can Empower support this?
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to participate, and congratulations and best wishes for the whole Empower program. For me, it's absolutely fundamental, because you see, both from a European perspective and from a more global perspective, that data has become fundamental to the digital transformation of society. If you look into Europe, you see with the Recovery and Resilience Facility that the twin transitions of climate and digital have fixed investments that imply that data is going to drive not only the digital dimension, but also the climate dimension. The digital decade over the next 10 years, the digital compass, where the 4 cardinal points of skills, infrastructure, business, government collaborate together. All these give rise to the European data strategy and national data strategies, which Ireland has, and the UK and Germany have started this recently this year. All these drive the point that now is the moment that data begins to be at the center of digital transformation. And it's the reusable raw material that drives innovation, sustainable growth, jobs, and public services. And that transforms itself into common data spaces. We heard mentioned there of the European health data space, where reusable, real-time, free flow of trustworthy data and the sharing and reuse of data and collaborative working, facilitated by semantic interoperability, becomes the key to delivering societal benefits for all. And globally, we see exactly the same realization. COVID, climate, trade. The World Bank issues a flagship report every year. This year, their flagship development report for 2021 is entitled Data for Better Lives. Its total focus is on data and on the value from data, trust in data, and equitable access to data and the benefits of data. Similarly, you see the OECD with recommendations on data sharing, and you see the UN Trade Council, cross-border data flows for development. So and all these emphasize legal safeguards, capacity building, technical and organizational enablers around data. So it's no exaggeration to say that global information management will be a prerequisite for solving the unprecedented challenges that we have today. And that's the context within which Empower has the possibility to make a global contribution, not only at a national level, not only at a European level, but also at a global level. And these common data spaces, which will become the building blocks for a data-driven society and a data-driven economy, will depend on a framework of 3 interdependent layers: value from data, trust in data, data infrastructure, ring-fenced with data security, and supported by institutions and skills. And that's the foundation for user-centric services, providing socioeconomic benefits for citizens and citizens. And Empower's 5 strands, from what I have seen, have the potential to deliver interdependent outcomes directly influencing the rollout of the national and EU-wide common interoperable data spaces. And that's the challenge and for Empower, but also its potential to be a major player, both nationally and internationally. And that's the context within which it's time for a European data charter for the management of data in the digital age, which should reflect the fundamental values and European rights for around data, emphasized by the Berlin Declaration last year. It should be a strong message that we're going to have the foundations for a future where data is considered a public good, which was mentioned previously by some speakers, and where citizens' rights are protected while maximizing the value of data to create a safer and more just society, a new and improved user-centric public services, and a sustainable, resilient economy. And these principles that should be reflected in the Charter are: access to information is a human right. There should be a legal basis for the ethical use of data. Citizens should have the right to decide what to do with their data. Semantic interoperability will be the motor for sharing and the reuse of data. Free movement of data has to be guaranteed. A general once only principle going beyond public services, but to underpin common data spaces and data institutional safeguards. All these will give rise to a trusted ecosystem of data and digital services. So strands 4 and 5 of the Empower program specifically address many of these issues, with particular emphasis on the socio-technical nature of data ecosystems, where producers, consumers, developers, users come together to create something new and beneficial for all. But because of the holistic nature of the outcomes, the other strands are also fundamental. So together, these 5 strands can be the basis for initiatives that will impact not only Irish society, but will be the motor for the real benefits of the reusable raw material that data represents for tomorrow's future. And I can only wish the program all success in meeting these challenges.
Thanks so much to Declan, Barry, Derek, Geraldine and Ultan for that panel discussion.